Last week, AMD launched their latest Threadripper 9000 series CPUs. All these new Zen 5 CPUs are ready to go to town on whatever professional workload that you can throw at them, further increasing AMD's performance lead in the high-end desktop market. And while these offer some absolutely incredible performance, they're also leaving a glaring hole in the market behind them. Welcome back to Craft Computing, everyone. As always, I'm Jeff, and I'm here with a little bit different take on AMD's latest Threadripper 9000. We'll start off with the good, and there is a lot of good here. On the table next to me are two of the three CPUs that AMD announced this week in the Threadripper 9970X and the 9980X. They are 32 and 64 core CPUs respectively, with nearly identical specs beyond that. They both have a boost clock speed of 5.4 GHz, 1 MB per core of L2 cache, along with a shared L3 cache of around 4 MB per core, 128 MB in total on the 9970X, with 256 MB on the 9980X. They're both 350 watt chips, and even cost the same per core, with a retail price of $24.99 for 32 cores, or $49.99 for 64. Much like the leap from Zen 4 to Zen 5 on the desktop side of things, we're seeing around a 15% improvement in IPC inside of Windows, with a couple applications doing a bit better than that. Linux performance is even better, sometimes pushing closer to 30% improvement gen over gen. One of the main benefits of the Zen 5 architecture were the improvements made to AVX 512 implementation, so things like CPU-based audio and video processing, 3D rendering, encryption or compression processes should see a sizable bump over the previous generation. So the question on mine and everyone else's minds, should you buy one? No. And that's nearly a universal statement. Unless you have a specific workload designed to take full advantage of the additional memory and CPU bandwidth, you are almost always better off with a standard desktop CPU. And I'm not even talking about this from a value standpoint either. I'm talking when it comes to tasks that I do here on a regular basis. Video and photo editing, gaming, some light CAD work here and there. Not only are the prices absolutely absurd in terms of performance per dollar, in a lot of cases, my testing actually shows that the 9950X3D is actually straight up faster. Obviously, I'm posting this a couple days after the review embargo lifted, as I didn't have quite enough time to complete all of my testing, and then I was busy the rest of the week, so I'm filming this on Sunday, the embargo was Wednesday. Sorry. But this also gave me the opportunity to peek at a couple benchmark results from a number of other outlets, like Serve the Home and Level 1 Techs, compare them to the results that I collected, and I noticed a couple things that I want to talk about here. My testing was also a bit crazy, as I'm not even bothering testing against the previous generation Threadripper. 9000 series is faster, and all of the SKUs are the same price. Unless you're getting a 30% off deal on a previous generation chip, and you can live with your workstation that makes you money being upwards of 30% slower in some tasks, I guess you might consider a 7000 series today. But for people in the market for a workstation, that's not even a question. Time is money, and 9000 is faster than 7000. No, I'm actually comparing today the 9970X 32-core Threadripper to the top-end 16-core Ryzen 9950X3D, mainly to show that even if you think you need a Threadripper, you probably don't. And if jumping from 16 cores to 32 cores doesn't make sense, it's going to make even less sense to consider 64 cores. This has been something I've been thinking about a lot for the last year since the 7000 series Threadripper dropped. I actually started using the 64-core 7980X as my main workstation, because if there's one thing that can take advantage of such a beastly CPU, it's 422 ProRes 4K video editing that I do every single day. Right? Truth be told, I actually switched back to a Ryzen 7900X3D around 4 months ago. While the workstation chip is an absolute beast in Cinebench or FFmpeg, I'm not spending 8 hours every day with the utilization of my CPU pegged at 100%. If I'm editing a video, 99% of that work is scrubbing through the timeline, applying effects, or color correction. And that's not pegging my CPU either. The only time in theory I'd be utilizing the full utility of all 64 cores would be in the final render, if I was doing CPU rendering. But I have an RTX 5080, which is doing 90% of that heavy lifting anyway. I expected the 7980X based on Zen 4 with 64 cores to be head and shoulders above the 7900X3D, which by the way only has 12 cores, not even the full 16. But that's kind of my point, is unless you have a dedicated workload that will actually be utilizing the CPU to its fullest extent, and you need it to make money, you probably don't need a Threadripper. Case in point, Cinebench is a great tool for generalizing CPU performance both in multi- and single-threaded metrics. Comparing the 32-core 9870X to the 16-core 9950X3D, we see the Threadripper is a full 76% faster when running twice as many cores. It's not double the speed, mind you. The performance improvement is not linear. 32 cores are 76% faster than the top-end 16-core desktop chip. And when it comes to single-threaded performance, well, the workstation chips have never been able to keep up here, with Threadripper coming in around 8% slower than the 9950X3D. I also like to test Cinebench R15 still, as even though it doesn't scale well for lengthy CPU testing, it does show what CPUs are capable of in short bursts, which I feel is still quite relevant today. Here, the margins are a bit closer, with the 9970X coming in at 72% faster in multi-threaded testing, but 12% slower in the single-threaded tests. And these results show a bit of what I experienced over the last year on my workstation. If you have a workload to give the CPU that it can 100% take advantage of, think decrypting the human genome or CPU rendering your latest video, Threadripper 100% lives up to its name. But for all your other tasks, desktop Ryzen is actually faster. Your daily web browsing, you're scrubbing through a ProRes timeline in DaVinci Resolve, your Photoshop tasks, your audio editing, your any content creator type tasks, any gaming that you want to do on this. Ryzen is faster. Heck, even tasks that can use 100% of the CPU power of Threadripper struggled to stay ahead of the 9950X3D. 7-zip compression was just 12% faster. FFmpeg X264 CPU encoding was just 18% faster at 1080p and 43% faster at 4K. CPU-only AV1 encoding, it was actually slower than the 9950X3D at 1080p by around 3%, and around 5% slower at 4K with 10-bit color. And to be clear, this isn't a knock on Threadripper for not being up to the task on these applications. It's more to do with a single user on a single workstation not truly having a viable use for even 32 cores, let alone 64, and how bigger number better may not actually yield the returns you expect. And while I'm going to stop talking about performance here, I can already hear the clickety-clack of some cherry blues arguing, what about multitasking? I constantly have After Effects, Photoshop, Premiere, Autodesk, Bamboo Studio, 487 Chrome tabs, Spotify, Discord, and Teams all open at the same time. I need Threadripper for multitasking. Actually, you need a decent amount of memory because you're only a single user. So unless you're actively interacting with 4 of those programs at the exact same time and they're utilizing all the CPU horsepower that you have available, not just flipping between them, most of them are sitting there idle. And switching between them would be faster with a single-threaded performance desktop class CPU. Since workstations are supposed to make you money, let's talk costs here. The difference is not only between the CPUs, but the platform costs between Ryzen and Threadripper are on completely different planes of existence. The 16-core Ryzen 9950X is expensive for a desktop CPU, clocking in just over $500. But for exactly double the cores, you'll be spending 5 times the price at $2,500 for a 32-core Threadripper 9970X. 5 times the price for, at most, a 75% improvement in specific multi-threaded workloads, while also being 8 to 12% slower in single-threaded tasks. And it's not just about the CPU cost. A decent AM5 motherboard for Ryzen can be had for around $300, supporting every feature the platform has to offer. Meanwhile, the Asus TRX 50 Sage board that I have here is $900 by itself. Just the motherboard for Threadripper is the same price as a 9950X3D and its own motherboard to go along with it. And you have money to save and spend on a cooler. But it still somehow gets worse. Threadripper also exclusively uses registered ECC DDR5 memory and needs 4 channels for the CPU to run at full speed. The 128GB kit of G.Skill G5 Neo that we have here in the Threadripper box is $800. That's more than double the price of a 128GB kit for the Ryzen desktop. And just to drive the cost differences home, let's say I wanted to build an 8-core Ryzen 9700X PC. A decent x870E motherboard, 128GB of DDR5 6400 memory, and the 8-core 9700X would run you around $960. Doubling your core count to the 16-core Ryzen 9950X is only $215 more, bringing the total cost to $1,175, as all the other hardware in that platform stays the same. You can also spend another $100 and opt for the 16-core 9950X3D if you wanted some better gaming chops, or have specific needs for the 3D cache. But let's say you wanted to double your core count again. That means not only jumping to the Threadripper 9970X to get a 32-core CPU, but also a workstation-class TRX50 motherboard and ECC registered memory, which drives the cost from $1,175 to $4,200. That's 3.6 times more expensive for roughly 75% more performance. And that's only in applications that scale properly. And as we've seen, most consumer applications don't. And of course, these costs are all also assuming that you're sourcing the parts and building the PC yourself, but most Threadripper PCs are bought from OEMs. But I can still think of one case outside of niche developers or render farms that might still have a use case for the Threadripper platform, and that's people who rely on PCI Express expansion. I'm obviously finding myself in this camp more often than not, with my systems here in the office having usually 10 or even 100 gig network cards, HDMI capture cards, and additional NVMe drives and the like. AMD's desktop CPUs only have 24 PCI Express 5.0 lanes connected to the CPU, with an x870E motherboard chipset allowing for 12 additional PCI Express Gen 4 lanes and 8 more Gen 3 lanes. Even looking at this ROG x870E crosshair motherboard, there's a single PCI Express 5.0 x16 slot for a graphics card, and based on the fact that that's the only x16 slot, that's really your only option there. Pretty much every other motherboard manufacturer has been linking the rest of the CPU lanes to a pair of M.2 slots for Gen 5 storage, and that's also the case here. So that's all of the CPU lanes gone, which is actually fine, as there's very few PCI Express Gen 5 cards outside of GPUs on the market right now. The x870E chipset has 12 additional lanes of Gen 4, which are usually split into either an X8 slot and a single M.2, or in the case of the crosshair here, an X4 slot and 2 more M.2s for a total of 4 NVMe drives. My personal situation here, my streaming PC has a graphics card, 2 NVMe drives, a Blackmagic Decklink Quad 4K capture card, which requires an X8 slot, and I also have a 10 gigabit network card, which also requires an X8 slot, which the motherboard doesn't have, so it's running in an X4. If I needed more NVMe, or wanted to utilize the 100 gigabit networking here in my office, I'd need more PCI Express lanes than my CPU has. And the only way to get more lanes is to invest into a high-end desktop platform like Threadripper. The problem is that it's 3.5 times more expensive to dive into Threadripper as it is a normal desktop system. And yes, I'm going to completely ignore the 24-core 9960X CPU, and so should you. At least on a TRX50 motherboard with a Threadripper 9000, I've got 48 PCI Express lanes, and I can run all the cards I need, right? Well, I actually ran into very similar problems as my Ryzen desktop, and this complaint is more aimed at the current state of graphics cards, but it still applies to the platform. Unless you're able to find a 2-slot GPU, like a Founders Edition RTX 5080 or 5090, or you go with AMD's Workstation card in the Radeon AI Pro 9700, you're going to be looking at a triple slot or even thicker GPU. The problem with that is most PC cases only support 7 expansion slots, so there's not a lot of options on where you can actually put that GPU, and you're going to block some of the expansion even in your workstation case. Threadripper 9000, again, has 48 lanes of PCI Express 5.0 connectivity, which feels like an arbitrary limit given that Threadripper is essentially the same silicon as AMD's EPYC Turin CPUs, and those all have 128 lanes. But I digress. Looking at the Asus Sage TRX50, we've got a pair of PCI Express 5.0 X16 slots right on top. But they're only usable if your top card is a 2-slot card. And as you can see, my graphics card is a 3-slot GPU. It blocks your only other full-speed X16 slot on the board if I install it into the top slot, which means I've got my Zotac RTX 5080 mounted in the 2nd slot, so I can at least have access to 2 X16 slots. The problem is, even though I now have access to this X16, installing the graphics card in this 2nd slot blocks my access to a PCI Express 5.0 x8 and a PCI Express 4.0 x16. The only other slot available on this motherboard is the very bottom slot, which is a PCI Express 4.0 x4 slot. And I would love to use this as my main workstation, but I still wouldn't be able to install both my 10 gigabit network card and my Blackmagic capture card because the GPU is taking up too much space. And again, this isn't necessarily a problem with AMD or Asus. It's because GPU makers insist on creating 3 or 4 slot GPUs that cover what little expansion options we already have in the name of marketing. Let's make sure that if we have a GPU installed in the PC, it's big and bold and lets the customer know which brand of GPU they bought. If I'm building a workstation because I need PCI Express expansion, I need slimmer video cards, and I need access to as many slots as possible. The reason I have a GPU in the second slot in the first place is so I can install this set of U.2 drives from Solidigm in a PCI Express carrier. The top 2 slots are my only Gen 5 options with 16 lanes, and I need all 16 lanes for both the graphics card and 4 U.2 drives. Which should look a little something like that. Of course, this could all be solved by AMD enabling all 128 lanes of PCI Express connectivity on the I/O die, which is shared with the EPYC Turin CPUs, enabling workstation boards to simply populate a full 7 slots of Gen 5 x16 with M.2 and U.2 connectivity to spare. But I digress again. We're working with 48 lanes on Threadripper, so you'll need to plan your builds accordingly and make sure your hardware will actually run at the speeds that you need them to. But what is it that I'm actually trying to get at? When Threadripper launched in 2017, I was a day one buyer, spending $599 on an 8-core Threadripper 1900X, along with $399 on an X99 MSI motherboard. Workstation class performance, nearly unlimited PCI Express expandability, and prices that match the performance differential of the desktop chips available at the time. But Workstation and High-End Desktop wasn't for everyone back then, and it's definitely not for everyone today. The point of this video wasn't to bash on AMD's Threadripper line. In fact, so far, the 9000 series has been some of the fastest and most stable workstation chips I've used over the years. If you have a workload that can take advantage of the CPU core layout, the quad-channel DDR5 registered ECC memory, or the oodles of PCI Express Gen 5 bandwidth, not only is there really no other option, but Threadripper is a really compelling product. But I'm also here to tell you that if you're a gamer, or a video editor, or a content creator, or a streamer, or anyone looking to simply make your 16-core system a bit faster, Threadripper is not for you. You might think it is, it's not. You might think your software is optimized to make all 32 or 64 cores go burr. It's probably not. And even if you do have a workload that does scale up, the 32-core is still only 75% faster than the 16-core, and the 16-core is 1/3 the price of a full system. The truth is, unfortunately, there's not a product on the market right now for users who max out the expandability of a 9950X-based system. If you have a GPU, 2 NVMe drives, and need to install more than one PCI Express X4 device on top of that, your only option is spending 3 times the cost on a platform that will likely wind up being slower in most tasks and more power hungry. Again, going back to the beginning of Ryzen and Threadripper, in 2017, the Ryzen 1800X was priced at $499. That got you 8 cores and 16 threads of Zen 1, dual-channel memory, and 16 PCI Express lanes. It was $599 for 8 cores of the exact same technology on the Threadripper die with 4 channels of memory and 60 PCI Express lanes. And just $999 got you a 16-core Threadripper. Given the Ryzen 9950X is just $500 today, it's actually less expensive than the Ryzen 1800X was when you take inflation into consideration. Back in 2017, twice the money got you twice the CPU. But that couldn't be further from the truth today. A 32-core CPU itself is 5 times the price compared to the 16-core desktop counterpart. While some may praise the leap to registered ECC as a requirement for Threadripper as well, it definitely doesn't help the cost of the platform either. So overall, I'm pretty torn on this. While on one hand, Threadripper 9000 is absolutely the tool that some people are going to need for their professional workloads, it's not a platform that even enthusiasts should be touching. In gaming, it's slower. In video editing, it's slower. For CPU-based video rendering, it's marginally faster at X264, but also slightly slower at AV1. For CPU-based ray tracing, it's definitely faster, but not by a factor of 2 like the CPU core count would have you believe, and certainly not at the 5x price increase that the CPU has to justify the performance. And while Threadripper has doubled the PCI Express lanes of consumer desktop chips, they're also still artificially limited to be short of AMD's EPYC Turin lineup. But we also come back to the same argument I've had for NVIDIA keeping GPU prices high for the last couple generations. Why would NVIDIA spend fab time cranking out $300 consumer GPUs or even $2,000 RTX 5090s when they instead could be making $80,000 B300 super chips and selling those faster than they can make them to customers who don't care what the price is? AMD is in a similar position for both desktop and workstation markets, and while it sucks for us as consumers, it's also hard to fault a company for making money where they can. So do you or even I need a 32 or 64 core AMD Threadripper? Absolutely not. But damn if they aren't still awesome. And look, I know I didn't cover every aspect of this, but I did try to cover this from is it a platform worth upgrading from desktop on, which is what Threadripper originally was supposed to be. And the answer to that right now is no. But those of you who have Threadripper and actually utilize it, what do you use it for? Let me know down in the comments below. I'd love to explore some of those use cases a little bit further. In the meantime, make sure to drop this video a like and subscribe to Craft Computing if you haven't done so already. Follow me on Blue Sky at Craft Computing for daily shenanigans like this. And if you like the content you see on this channel and want to help support me in what I do, head on over to craftcomputing.store and pick up one of my fantastic nucleated pint glasses. And that's going to do it for me in this one. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, I will see you in the next video. Cheers, everyone. Beer for today is a non-alcoholic affair. It is the Deschutes Black Butte Porter NA. This is a gateway for so many people to the world of craft beer. Deschutes out of Bend, Oregon is an absolutely fantastic brewery, and Black Butte Porter is one of their most famous brews. This is their non-alcoholic version. Looking forward to it. First off, have you ever seen a head on a non-alcoholic beer like that? I will take partial credit for this with my nucleated pint glasses, which you can pick up for yourself at craftcomputing.store, but also just a fantastic brew by Deschutes. The nice thing about Black Butte Porter is it's unabashedly smooth, and there's no real harsh transition during the flavor. It doesn't make you think a lot while you're drinking it. But it has a lot of the hallmarks that really good porters tend to have. This one starts out pretty dry and just a little bit bitter. Not insane. I'd give it like a 4 out of 10 as far as bitterness goes. And then the only thing it evolves into is this slightly sweet, malty roast. And the roast is also not all that intense. It's like a 2 out of 10. It's like smelling a campfire, but the smoke's not blowing in your face. It's, you know, toasting a marshmallow at arm's length. It's that just ever so slight kiss of it's a dark beer. And I think that's what I love so much about it and why this introduces so many people to the world of dark beers. It exposes it to them in a way that they can understand whether or not they're going to like it. And I'll say, the non-alcoholic version holds up. This is solid.